So I recently came across a video in which our own venerable Honorable Kennedy Agyapong is being interviewed. And in the interview, he speaks on a range of issues, including his businesses, his presidential ambition, and more. But what my interest was in that interview was the part he laments on his real estate investment. So apparently Ken owns over 200 properties in Ghana, and according to him, he has regretted.
Let me tell you, when you have property at cantonments, $500,000, okay, your rent will not be more than $4,000 a month.
Right.
But if you use the $500,000 to do business, and you make 10%
Cash flow.
okay, I'm just drawing your attention.
Yeah.
I have so many houses here that I've regretted. Some of them I don't even know. So I don't remember unless I tell my cousin and so let's go, those things. I've regretted because if I had invested that money in business, young man, I would have made a lot of money. I have over 277 houses in Ghana. And it's a waste. It's a waste. I've regretted buying those houses because I don't get people to rent them.
Because you are keeping them?
Yeah, because I'm keeping
But
them.
if you were selling them,
if I was selling
you
them,
get a cash flow.
right. But I don't want to sell. I want to give it to my kids. I have many kids, so I want to share it for them. And my plan is, if you're a girl or a woman, you marry and your relationship doesn't work, you come back home, you have your properties, you can dispose of some of them to start business. I mean, this is how I think aloud to help. But in actual fact, if I have invested that amount of money in business, you know how much I'll be making? So renting,
It's a bit dicey.
yeah,
Okay.
because you see the house at cantonments, you can have one, it's okay, no problem, as a security or backup in case your business collapse. Your property becomes a fallback that you can dispose of. Because what Sule Muntari asked me, have you lost your business or collapsed, whatever? Yes, I think in 1990, I had 11 houses, but I had to sell 6 of them to start life again. Yeah, Tesano, Chimota, I disposed of all those properties to start life again.
So I believe Honorable's remarks captures a lot about real estate investment in Ghana, and it presents an excellent case study. So we hear him reference his property at cantonments, in which he described as worth $500,000. So I believe this is the current valuation of the property and not necessarily how much he might have acquired the property for in the past. And he goes on to say that it's able to generate revenue in the form of rent of up to $4,000. So Honorable didn't mention, but I believe this should be a month's rent. And if you do the math, this is less than 1%. Then he goes on to compare this to other businesses where he's able to make 10% and all that. So in essence, Honorable is saying that compared to other businesses, real estate is not lucrative. First of all, I would want to say that beyond the numbers, there are some good reasons you might consider investing in real estate, obviously. And I'll come to that later on in this video. But one of those reasons is that real estate helps us to satisfy our shelter needs as humans. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, our shelter needs is one of our basic needs. But the focus here is on real estate as an investment. And what I get from the video, or in fact generally, is that for many people or for many investors, they invest in real estate because of the social prestige attached to it, or based on emotions and not necessarily based on the data and analysis. And in fact, Honorable makes this point if you watch the entire video. He says that for many people, once they make money, their first instinct is to acquire property. So what I want to do in this video is to use a realistic data-driven scenario to expand on Honorable's perspective. and I'll be a little bit detailed and quite technical. So this video will be quite long, but I implore you to stay put, watch along, and watch till the end. So let's assume you have some money, perhaps your savings, and you decide to invest in residential real estate, and you are offered a plot of land in, say, Amasaman, or one of the areas near Amasaman. So note that in Ken's scenario, Honorable Ken's property is located at Cantonment, but we want to use Amasaman or a similar neighborhood because those areas have experienced a lot of sprawl over the years, and that is where many people are able to buy land. So a lot of people can relate more to such a neighborhood than Cantonment. So let's say you are offered a plot of land in some of these areas like Amasaman or the surrounding neighborhoods for, say, 200,000 Ghana cedis. And after some inquiries and research, you find out that 2-bedroom apartments are in demand. So you decide to build an 8-unit apartment block. Each unit will provide for a 2-bedroom apartment. And this is based on your assessed financial strength. So let's get into it. So let's say this is the floor area and the accommodation of each 2-bedroom apartment, each 2-bedroom unit. So each 2-bedroom unit will have a living area or a hall, 2 bedrooms, one being en suites, a kitchen, toilet and bath, and all that. So let's say each 2-bedroom unit will have a floor area of 70 square meters. So for the 8 units, that gives around 560 square meters. Now we have to account for common areas like corridors, staircases, and all that. So let's say this also is about 70 square meters. This brings the total floor area of the building to 630 square meters. Now let's break down the total project cost. So we start with the land, which we purchased for 200,000 Ghana cedis. Next is land documentation, because you have to register the land. So let's say this adds another 20,000 Ghana cedis. Now onto the construction costs. So we are going to use a very simple analysis to assess our construction costs. So in any building projects, know that there are often 2 major cost drivers: the finishes and the structural requirements, especially when you are dealing with multi-story buildings. So the higher you go, the more structural support you need, because you need more steel, more concrete, and all that. And so you should expect a higher cost per square meter. So for a standard block structure like this one with typical rental apartment finishes, the construction costs should fall between 4,000 Ghana cedis and 5,000 Ghana cedis per square meter. So let's go for the midpoint of 4,500 Ghana cedis per square meter. This means that given our total floor area of 630 square meters, this brings the construction cost to around 2.8 million Ghana cedis. Now let's also account for some external works. So external works are like the fence wall, the gates, compound pavement, and all that. So let's say we budget 300,000 Ghana cedis for our external works. We also have to make provision for other expenses like professional fees. Maybe you are going to obtain a permit and all that. So let's say that also we budget 60,000 Ghana cedis for that. So when we put everything together, the total project cost comes to approximately 3.4 million Ghana cedis. And of course, this is a simple analysis. In the real world, you will need a more detailed analysis, what we call bill of quantities, to assess your project costs. So at the current exchange rates, this roughly falls between 260,000 and 290,000 US dollars, depending on the rate you use, whether you're using the interbank rate or the rate you get from the forex bureaus. Since this is an investment, the next key thing to consider is cash flows. But even before that, let's assume that the construction project will take a year to complete. So after the project is completed in a year's time, our cash flows will be in two streams. The cash inflows, that's the rent income we earn, and cash outflows, that's the expenses we incur, such as taxes and all that. So as I said, our cash inflows will be in the form of the rent we charge our tenants. But to attract tenants, we need to set market competitive rent. So from a little research I did both online and on the ground, I found out that a 2-bedroom apartment in an area like Amasaman and similar neighborhoods can be rented for at 2,500 Ghana cedis per month. And note that this is beginning a year from now when the project is completed. But we also have to account for inflation and rising costs. So we assume that after every 2 years, the rent will increase by 10%. So this means that in the first year, that's a year from now when the project is completed, and in the second year, the rent will be 2,500 Ghana cedis per month. Then in year 3 and in year 4, the rent will increase to 2,800 Ghana cedis per month, and so on and so forth. So note that this rent is a month's rent for each 2-bedroom apartment. So to get the total rent for all the 8 units, we multiply the monthly rent by the 8 units. Then to get our annual rent, we multiply the total monthly rent by the 12 months in a year. The next thing we are going to consider is occupancy rates. In the interview, remember Honorable admitted that he struggles to get tenants to fill his properties, and that's why it's even important to set market competitive rents. And so in our analysis, we are going to factor in what we call occupancy rates. So occupancy rates is simply the proportion of units or apartments that are filled at any given time. So for instance, our apartment has 8 units. So if 4 out of these 8 units are rented out at any given time, it means that the occupancy rate is 50%. So now Amasaman or similar neighborhoods, Down West, is not like cantonments. Cantonment is a high-end area, and so landlords typically will not struggle to fill their apartments, provided that the rent is reasonable and the property is appealing. However, tenants do not appear automatically. You would have to market your property to attract tenants. So for this reason, we will assume that the landlord engages professional real estate agents to market the property, and in return, they get a commission of 5% of the rental income. So in our analysis, we say that in year 1, the landlord is now finding their feet. They are new and now finding their feet, so the occupancy rate will be 50%. In year 2, the occupancy rate will increase to 75%, and in year 3 onwards, it will increase to 90%. So, in fact, it's possible to have full occupancy, but we want to remain pragmatic in this analysis. So let's say from year 3 onwards, the occupancy rate will be 90%, and this is because we are actively marketing the property. Now let's turn to the expenses. That's the cash outflow. So the first is the agent commission, which we've already assumed will be 5% of the rent income. The next is taxes. So in Ghana, residential rental properties are often subject to an 8% rent tax of the rent income. You also need to pay for property rates and ground rent. So property rates, for instance, are based on the value of the property. Because of that, the rates vary. So let's say we are budgeting 12% of the rent income to cater for taxes. The next is maintenance and also insurance. So typically, tenants should be responsible for damages, but as a landlord, you need to also budget for major repairs and wear and tear. You also need to insure the property, and insurance premiums are often based on the replacement value of the building. So for the sake of simplicity, we will set aside 10% of our rent income into a sinking fund, which can be used to pay for insurance premiums and also cater for major repairs when they arise. So I think basically these are the expenses you should incur in managing your property. The first big question any investor asks is, how long will it take to recover my investment? So in finance, we call this the payback period. So when we modeled the cash flows in Excel, the payback period came out to be between the 15th and the 16th year. So this is quite long, especially if you compare this to the typical investor expectation of say 5 years, or let's say between the 5th and 10th year. Every investor should expect to recoup their investment. But looking at it critically, this is still not outrageous, considering that mortgages, which is another form of real estate investment, typically run for between 10 and 15 years, and some even stretch to 20 years. However, the payback period does not account for the time value of money. Mortgages do account for time value of money, and time value of money is very crucial when assessing long-term investments. So this is where the net present value, or the NPV, and the IRR, internal rate of return, come in. So to compute the net present value, aside the cash flows that we've already seen, we also need other inputs. We need an expected rate of return, or what we call a discount rate. So to determine the discount rates, we compare the investment to other forms of investment like treasury bills. So in our scenario, we set the expected rate of return, or the discount rate, at 20%. And this is based on average treasury bill rates over the past 10 to 15 years, plus a risk premium. The next thing we need is an investment horizon, and we are going to set this at 20 years. This is long enough to cover the full investment life cycle, more so considering that the payback period is between the 15th and 16th year. The third thing we need is the terminal value. So think of terminal value as the value of the property at the end of the investment horizon. So the net present value is basically trying to assess the profitability of a project, considering the cash flows and time value of money. So the rule is that if the NPV, that's the net present value, if it is positive, then it means that the project is financially worthwhile. If the net present value is negative, it means that the project is not viable and should be rejected. So when we run our model in Excel, the NPV came out to be negative, which indicates that the project is not financially viable. Internal rate of return, that's the IRR. So think of the IRR as the break-even discount rate, or the discount rate at which the NPV becomes zero. So remember that we set our discount rate at 20%. It means that the project's own internal rate of return should be more than 20% to be worthwhile, or at least should be 20%. But when we modeled this in Excel, we found out that the project's own interest rates, that's the internal rate of return, is 10%. So this is far below our expected rate of return of 20%. This means that based on both the net present value and the internal rate of return, the 8 units residential rental project is not financially attractive. So indeed, Honorable Ken's position that long-term residential real estate as an investment compared to other forms of businesses is not lucrative is largely true, and there are several reasons for this. One of them, I believe, is the high interest rate regime we have here in Ghana, among other reasons. So unless you are able to charge rent significantly higher than the market rents while also achieving a high occupancy, then I believe you are better off venturing into other businesses. In fact, you realize that in Ken's cantonment property, he mentions that he's able to charge rent of up to $4,000. Compare that to our scenario in which we used cities for our analysis. This even shows how worlds apart both neighborhoods are. And in fact, I know many tenants or many people who even consider this 2,500 Ghana cedis we used in our analysis as quite on a high side for a 2-bedroom apartment. Interestingly, investors also think this rent is quite on the low side. This shows how come we often complain about the expensive rent we have here in Ghana. So it is no surprise that many real estate developers will prefer to build and sell outright rather than hold and rent out their units. But of course, long-term residential real estate like this one is not the only form of real estate, long-term real estate investment you can make. So for instance, this same building can be used for, say, short stay rentals, what we call Airbnbs or guest houses and all that. But I think with that, you might need more creative marketing and active management to be able to make more per unit, and that might make more financial sense. But beyond the numbers, there are good reasons you might consider, as we mentioned earlier, you might consider investing in real estate, like long-term real estate. And even Ken mentioned some of these in the video. So remember that Honorable Ken mentioned that he was able to fall back on his properties when he needed money for his business, when his business collapsed. So this means that real estate can protect your wealth as an entrepreneur, or it can stabilize your portfolio. So you can even look at it from this perspective. You can leverage on the properties you hold to secure loans as collateral, to secure loans to expand your businesses. Number 2, remember Honorable Ken mentions that he plans to pass on his properties to his children. Remember, he also says that the property is worth $500,000, and I mentioned that I think this is the current valuation and not how much he might acquire it for. So this shows that the property has increased in value over the years. So it is possible that even when his children inherit it in the future, the property might be even worth more. And this tells us that holding real estate can preserve generational wealth. Again, remember we mentioned that real estate helps us as humans to satisfy our shelter needs. So you can even look at it as an investor, you can even look at it from the altruistic perspective as contributing to a social good. You know, housing deficit is quite on the high in Ghana. So by investing in long-term residentials like that, you are contributing to reducing the housing deficit we have here in Ghana. But I know many investors will not look at that. They will not look at any investment from that perspective. But in fact, you can, plus you the landlord, you can even decide to live in one of the units while you rent out the others. So for the 8 units apartment block, you can decide to rent the rest out while you live in one of them. And this even presents an excellent case for investing in real estate as a retirement support. So for our elderly who are not able to work, who may not have the energy to work, you know, real estate can be managed passively. So you can use the revenue earned from rent as your income. So this is what I mean when I say that Honorable Ken's remarks captures and embodies a lot about real estate in Ghana. So while it might not be an alternative for a lucrative business, it obviously can be a strategy to protect your long-term wealth and also grow your wealth. I hope you found this video insightful. If you did, kindly hit the like button, share to others who might be interested in this, and also subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.